Very happy to be with you again today with another talk. So it's your turn.
Yeah. Welcome back, everyone.
Thank you.
Han's work was very hypnotizing, so let's stay hypnotized. And welcome, François.
Thank you.
So, François, you are from Lausanne in Switzerland.
Yes, sir.
You started your career with graphic design, and then you did type in 1989, 98.
Yeah,
around this?
I started to publish that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And you have a pretty impressive list of clients, like Apple, the New York Times Magazine, and so on. And you, amongst many things, you are a teacher in ECAL in Lausanne too.
Yes.
You published about type design, and you wrote about type design. And you published a lot of typeface in the Optimo foundry. Yeah. And I learned that you are a cyclist too.
Sometime, but
yeah.
now I'm...
Or maybe is it too much type design? Or we don't know.
It's a nice companion to days on a computer.
Yeah.
I was expecting to follow the Tour because, okay, there's football, but don't forget the Tour.
Tour de France, yeah, of course.
I'm a great fan of eccentric Chris Froome. I'm very happy that he's in a game again. But I'm afraid I will be on my television, in front of my television instead of...
sorry about
yeah,
that.
so, yeah, but
so thank you for being here, and please make a warm welcome for François Rappo.
Thank you. Well, I have the opportunity today to follow up a bit, to meet the student from type at Paris, and well, it was not a surprise. It was a bit vertigo to cover maybe 400 century of type design within one day. So, but it's a bit like a dream I still have. So I have a little trailer first. I was trained as a graphic designer, so back in the 70s. So I'm still very surprised to be able to produce typeface. You know, it was out of my, totally outside of my dream in the 70s. So I released maybe not even 10% of what I have on my hard disk. I really like to draw. I think type design is drawing, and I really like to draw, even if you see outline, you see part of the font. I like to draw. So when everything is all right, I'm a left-handed. I observe that I have a better understanding of logic and dynamic of typeface sometimes when I see them reversed, to my surprise. I have a dream in a home foundry at home, because I work in a very small space, to have like an encyclopedia. So a lot of fonts will remain as a sketch, but I like to put them on a paper and to be surprised by the result, and maybe later on in small circle in a network to say, okay, there's something in that font and I will use it. And the next step is to release as a commercial project. And sometimes there's like a gap and a lot of hesitation about that. What else? Yeah, it's still a surprise. As a graphic designer, we were trained to make lettering, and for me there's a huge gap between what I call lettering, typeface for a logotype, for a title, things we were supposed to learn in the 70s. 3 books to start with. First one is a book from a Swiss-German photographer, Hans Finzler. At the end of his life, he was a very complex photographer, modernist, but he just proposed his own work with 2 pinhole pictures. So that's what I like in type design. Sometimes we are really connected to very basic visual language. There was always a dream I had, being trained, educated in the 60s and 70s. Quite early when I was a child, it was a clear idea, well, I would be a graphic designer. Decided that somewhere in the 60s, 65, 66, it was very clear. At the same time, there's another book. This is the original cover of the LSD experience from Aldous Huxley, The Doors of Perception. Working on the typeface, it's refining perception. It's also meeting a reader expertise. So that's what I discovered the past 5 years. So the reader is an expert, and I have to understand how he's an expert. It could be part of the brief I'd like to develop. The last book is a bit different. I was a bit shocked when I discovered that in my own town, when I was struggling to try to move from graphic design to type design, in a high university, you know, the Federal University, they had summer academies conducted by two professors. Main professor was Roger Hersch, and the other one is the French professor Jacques André. And there was a meeting where they're developing algorithms about digital typography, and there was like a gap between this group of experts, this elite of people, and graphic designer like me. And I suspect, but I'm not sure, that at that time, in the end of the 80s, it was a top-down culture. The technology was supposed like a waterfall. To, you know, connected to this project, there was industrial type foundry, like Haas type foundry, and the newcomer in the field was Bob's type, used to be at that time involved in type design. They make beautiful projects like Trinité typeface from Dutch designer Bram de Douge, collaborated with type designers. So there was like something like a gap I had to bridge. It's a bit like a metaphor. You can see the little sign, it's the Wilhelm Haas Weg, crossing the Johannes Gutenberg Straße in Basel. You have an organic building. Everything seems to be very organic. And this is my idea of Swiss approach, of the Basel approach to type design. It's a former foundry, it's a former Haas foundry, but today it's a Rudolf Steiner school. And if you go through the picture, it's really a Rudolf Steiner organic architecture, the shed. This is a classroom. The former, maybe here we had punch cutters and engraving machine. The last active punch cutter, Edmund Thiele in Switzerland. And if you go further down in Basel, you will meet the headquarters, of course, of Goethe. And for me, for my approach, the very precise city when Helvetica was developed at the same city when you has somebody having almost the same name as the head of the Haas foundry developing the LSD pharmacology. Trained as a graphic designer in the 70s, the idea was to do everything. To be an illustrator, I was not a good illustrator. I had a passion for drawing, but I was hesitating to make illustration. This is a project I made with friends in the 80s, a cover of the ID Japan magazine, and I also had an interest for colors, for visual grammar, things like that. And there was a time in the 80s, there was so much money in Switzerland. There was almost no time to make illustration and design. You have to be an art director. You have to have a good phone to commission people, commission your skilled typographer, commission an illustrator, a photographer. And it was part of the gap we had at that time. Then I think everybody has the same feeling. I feel I'm a generation in transition. Everybody's in transition. I still have a passion for the old industrial typography, type design, but also very clearly, I'm part of this home foundry, private foundry, and through all this year, well, I slowly moved to more serious type design, not by choice, but the feedback we receive from the project we developed. So this is different project, very playful, from the early 90s or mid 90s, scripting, and I still have a kind of friendly vision of that approach. Yeah, it's still very fresh, and it was very clearly seen as how do you call that? It's a kindergarten game. It's a child game from the older generation. As a graphic designer, I had problem with the legacy of modernism. On the one hand, I was very interested in what we call now postmodern, so you can list different value. 18 years ago, I was commissioned to make, as a graphic designer, the designer of a catalog. An exhibition was, the topic was revisiting the 60s. And I was impressed by postmodern statement like visual solution, design solution should be related to a context. It's a bit not honest from a designer to repeat, to use the same language for different contexts and different projects. So as I was frustrated by very difficult access to type and type design in the 80s or previously, for this project, I decided to make a one-shot revival. So my idea was to use the font just once and to throw it away. So the idea was to revisit the Gashner mangled program typeface. It was 80 years ago. One shot, never use it twice. As a companion, so this is an attempt to make a rendering of that typeface. And he had companion some dingbats. The square dingbats are from one teacher I had in the 70s, and the target are from iron bands or early optical optical art made by graphic designer. If I have to go back to the font, I'm surprised that today it's just becoming like a template. So I know maybe 6 or 7 digital versions of this Gashner program. Later, after I met Christian Mengel, so I have a few slides about the meeting, and I'm surprised how it's becoming popular again. Because at that time, you have to remember, there was like Helvetica bashing. There was a totally new other attitude. And I felt a bit in between. We were shy to have direct contact to this generation, to the senior type designer, but we were also interested to play with part of the powerful design they made. So changing taste is an important thing because you have to solve so many design solutions at the end. It's taste. So I also added a bit a lighter dingbats to the set at that time for this single use. Then I was also interested in the fascination of history. For one project, I make the full pilgrimage. I wanted to have access to original punches. I would to touch them. It's like a bit of mystical things. I did that once, just once. I went to. It was in the Netherlands. It was in Haarlem, Enschede Museum. It's a very strange place. This security place. It's like a high security prison. I went there with Peter Bilac and Karel Martens, and then you have access to a cellar and you have very friendly people. And you have there part of the best French typographic legacy. I mean, the Jules Didot foundry, the remains of that foundry. At that time, I was a bit anxious because I worked on this Pierre Didot font, and I remember that Jean-François was releasing a bit earlier the Ambroise, quite similar. But it was in the first meeting with history, and a part of what I do at home is playing with history. So this first approach to history with no particular method and very clear attitude. So it's trying to discover problem and trying to solve them. The font is still in use, is still commercial today. I'm quite happy to have it in use in Brussels as a part of the communication of the opera, because during the Belgian Revolution in 1830, part of the Jules Didot foundry moved to Brussels, and Netherlands, they was a bit anxious to have a competition from Brussels. They wanted to have them to control the French market. So this is a little story we can add to the font. Historical project, it's part of what I'm interested in. There's also a bit naive rendering of a Baroque typeface. It slept for years on my hard disk till a friend of mine, graphic designer Gilles Gavillet, I have a lot of collaboration. He's also initiator of Optimo foundry, decided to use it. And to my surprise, it works quite well. I must also underline something. As a book designer, I like to have one single cut, one single weight, if possible. I don't like to have many masters, but this is my attitude as a book designer. So sometimes I have difficult to hear there was just one single master. It works perfectly both for title and text, but later on we had to develop the family. But as a book designer, I was involved also in book design and also in the Swiss competition of most beautiful Swiss book for years, and I always prefer to have just one single type size, one single weight, the regular one, and just one single master, but following the rules of the Neue Typography or the Jan-Tschichold or whatever. So, but this typeface had some interest, and I made a version to be part of the art fair Basel communication. So I discovered that art director, they really like to have a digital identity in typefaces. So I underline the digital part, almost provocative of that Swiss Baroque, or it's a Haas, the young Haas, Johannes Wilhelm Haas from Nuremberg, working in Basel, did in the 18th century. So it was a bit a naive approach to history. I never used myself the typeface. It was a bit too weird, but yeah, it proved to be effective on very graphic for the communication of the Art Basel. And it's nice to tell people, hey, you know, this typeface is connected to the history of the city in a way. So also, you know, don't forget, we had this years of Helvetica bashing. We have the gap between industry and post-industry. And for years, we had what I call sleeping beauty. Nobody was interested in rediscovering, working with this tradition. In many different countries, you have different contexts. In some countries, maybe you have quite early digital foundries online on the market, but in many places it's interesting to compare what happened between, you know, industry and post-industry. And I had the opportunity to follow up the research made by a student in the ECAL on the former Eastern Germany. It was quite similar. It was a totally different political context, but the gap between industrial and communist Germany and post-industrial, but like frustration, hesitation, were a bit similar. So I had the opportunity to, I'm not an historian, but to make like a timeline of Swiss type design. And the beginning of the timeline is arts and craft. It's the British private press movement, which I like a lot. And you know, it was a trigger that in 1916, the new director of the School of Zurich, he wanted to have everything from William Morris. The price list was difficult to find. He had all the books. He had, for study, for the student, an unbound version of the Chaucer, the masterpiece of Morris and Burne-Jones. So the idea was to make a timeline together with the studio Norm. They were graphic designer, but doing the catalog and the design, but also interest in digging into archive. And there was a typical Sleeping Beauty. So nobody made visit to this archive. Beautiful sleeping boxes. And here's, it's from Hermann Eidenbenz, one box with all the type design he made for us. There's a graphic, the Clarendon, and some other typeface. He made a collage, you know, careful. You know, it's protected. If in case of fire, you have to priority. And we were reopening those boxes and to make a consistent timeline. This is the working on the catalog. And there was a lot of interview. And as a graphic designer and type designer, I was interested to meet still active, talented designer like Christian Mengel from Team 77, designer of Unica. It's a meeting, they were students at that time. Philippe Carrer is a publisher, and Gillian Cachin, she's a graphic designer. And you have original drawing on transparent papers for Bobst. This is the media typeface. So I was interested to make like my own timeline, because you know, modernism sometimes is like a screen. You'd say modernism, okay, but the root of modernism is not modernism. They erased what was behind it. My favorite style is the arts and crafts, but I tried to connect that to also rediscovery of the Helvetica. So it's still a question. I don't want to go too much in detail. This was the most interesting industrial book produced in Switzerland. There's almost no communication on the art direction. It was the two art directors, Erich Nietzsche, one of the most talented art director, both American and Swiss, and Benny Schalcher. They were using original Helvetica, spot colors. There's 3 different reds and a black on the beautiful nap cover, and a serif typeface. What was the only serif typeface produced by Haas? I forgot its name right now. Sorry, it would be for later. Maybe somebody knew that. No, okay. It will come later. Anyway, Helvetica, trying to redesign the Helvetica for private use. You're familiar with that, probably. Here again, I have to design it reversed. What maybe it could be interesting to notice, they had different master for Helvetica. This is the master, the most popular one for the light, and to be a bit nasty, I must say, what Linotype did with the new house Grotesque is not really correct. They had 2 master, it's not very useful, and they missed the opportunity to make a nice digital version of this original light, bit square Helvetica. To my surprise, it works very well at both at large size and small size. So for many similar typeface, I decided never to make different master, to have just the right one, both for display and for text. The design of the digital version was used for the catalog cover, and together with the Moonbase Alpha from Cornel Windlin was a bit provocative, ironic, DIY-like early digital typeface in Switzerland. Yeah, and the poster too was using this typeface. 20 years ago, what could have been the first online foundry in Switzerland? So, you know, now it sounds normal to have an online foundry, but for me it was just like a joke at that time. As you can see, this is a reconstruction of the early website called Optimo that was online on October 1998. They were selling font, sound, T-shirt, and had a picture library too. And I will show you some font. This is the picture library we had from very nice photograph from Isabel Truniger from Zurich. And we had, well, I don't know if you can call that font. Some font were using the multiple master technology. Yeah, those are fonts. But now it's part of history. So the two websites, Liner2 and Optimo, were the first online foundry, maybe we say. But the attitude, the value, they were totally different. Then we moved to the site as it is right now. We are about to change again. And for me, it was totally unexpected. What was unexpected? To put it very simple, it was that it should move. Yeah. Yeah, it should move. Yeah. To put it very simple, it's the surprise it was to make so much money with font. I was surprised. It totally changed my view and our view. And here it was also new. 2000 or 2015 or 2015 was a special year for me because people like member of Team 77, they're starting to knock on the door to say, okay, we are interested to collaborate with you. And for me, but not for younger colleagues, it was a total surprise. So how they decided to work both with Liner2, and Optimo, and it was like a reconciliation, Versöhnung of Deutsch. It's like a dream, the grandfather, grandmother, and okay, a meeting again. As you have seen previously, it was very naive. There was PostScript format. It was very poor technology. And now, of course, mastering the technology, it's heavier and heavier. So part of this project was what I call a missing link. It was a very successful font, a cash cow, a workhouse, but a cash cow bringing a lot of money. The idea was, as a graphic train in the 70s, I say, there was always this dream of what could have been the origin of Helvetica, of the different font connected to Helvetica. And in the last interview of the art director of Berthold, Günther Gerhard Lange, he, for the first time, he made very clear that there was something before the accents Grotesque that came from another foundry. It was a total surprise for me. Came from an older foundry called Theinhardt, or the Königliche Gießerei, the royal type foundry. and possibly other typeface. I'm started to make some researches. I found this particular font, which is not, I think, connected to the Accents Grotesque. It's another font called Royal Grotesque, and to my eyes, at that time, it was almost 20 years ago, they were, hey, this is a missing link between the Helvetica and the Accents Grotesque. So from that, it was probably single cut, single weight, but sorry, not a single cut, hand cut, but a single weight, just a light version. And I extended to a family. I mean, I made different weight, of course. A bit in the spirit both of Helvetica and Accents Grotesque. Right now we are still developing the font. We are working on different width, extended, condensed, and many more. Monospaced, of course. We released a Greek and Cyrillic version this spring. So it was very nice to do that myself. I try to draw everything myself. I don't do the mastering. So the font is really successful. It changed my view on what could be the market and the feedback from the market. The New York Times wanted to have a spatial version, condensed. The ICA London wanted to have a rounded version. In fact, it's their logotype still today. And, well, like any quite successful font, it's quite interesting to follow up. It's used by a lot of graphic designer, very solid, very consistent corporate identity, almost too consistent maybe for me, for a university or Nike and fashion designer. So yeah, it's a story of a typeface in the market through its different users. So, and you don't really learn a lot because I like to work without commission. But it changed a bit your mind. You understand a bit the potential of what you try to develop almost in your kitchen. After dealing with history, I wanted to have a new grotesque, a very sleek grotesque. It's not very spectacular. Maybe it's the question now to put on the market a very plain, a very slick font. Some people are expecting to have something striking. It's a slow progress because behind its design, it's one of my favorite covers, there's kind of geometry. And this is for Wade Guyton. And it's a very neutral, I would say very slick typeface. I wanted to go through this stage to do that, to learn a bit about that kind of simple, slick design. I love a lot, this is my environment, the sans serif, the graphic typeface. Maybe it's over now, it's covered, there's a lot on the market, very good. Nevertheless, I took the risk to make another one based not on type design, on lettering. I made a huge difference between a lettering and typography. Typography is really, for me, connected to text, to very dense text information. Other things are lettering, display, something else. Here, for example, it's a course in Germany in the early 30s given by Eidenbands. It's for street signage, for huge lettering in the street, for neon signs, and it was a model. The students are supposed to follow the model, and it was the idea for a possible constructed with a few change, constructed typeface in that style, with S maybe inspired by Jugendstil, I mean the German arts and craft or early 20th century sans serif of Stefan Georger Schrift, or so it's a quick project. I wanted to have that. It's in use this spring by Zach Kai's studio. Well, it's a touch of a bit irrational design in this construction. Teaching graphic design, teaching type design is still an open question for me. Is it possible to propose student like template, like model? Is it interesting or not? Students are supposed to adopt or reject them, or what could be the balance between individual project and template? I was interested to make a generic typeface for and with the student to spare time and energy, and as a team project, because I observed what maybe you did. A lot of students, a lot of type designer, they are more or less like using template developed by the education they receive. They say, oh, this is coming from the school R, or this is coming from the school the H, and so on. And why not? But I think it should be explicit for teacher and student to, this is a template, this is a generic model. So we had a team project, short time, like 5 days, to make a typeface, if possible a complex one, as a generic model. So doing that, I was also interested in this idea, okay, if we try to go to the essential, could we meet some parameters that are coming from the reader expertise and experience beyond our idea of designer? So, and I become interested in a parallel field. We spoke about that this afternoon with some students about, I'm not a specialist, but I was surprised to discover in a parallel field of neuropsychology. There was very interesting research on reader's expertise. So the reader as an expert, being part of the game, not only the designer with a good tradition, but also the reader. And I'm very pleased to quote here famous, very interesting French scientist, Stanislas Dehaene. This is the British translation, but for type designer, it's very interesting to read this parallel research. It's very well edited. I'm totally naive about that field. This is, for example, possibly the way the brain is detecting some basic shape to refine its recognition, the reception of basic letter form elements. So, well, maybe it's a metaphor for type designer, but it's a good reading anyway. I wanted to imagine the link between, you know, if you're a non-expert reader, what do you appreciate? What do you like a bit more, this calligraphic element in that type? You don't pay attention to that. Your goal is not to focus on a type, is to eat them, to grasp the maximum of text information and to move faster. So I came back to this old-fashioned idea, sorry for the metaphor, of eurythmics. Maybe type reading, type design is kind of ergonomy. There's a physical basis common through different writing system, Roman, non-Roman, non-European. They have to meet what the brain is good for. The starting point was an historical typeface, late French Renaissance. It was Jacques de Saint-Lec. It's similar to Grandjean. So very nice, beautiful late Renaissance font. And the idea was is it possible to make a template out of that? Both for student and for teacher too. One single curve, to be repeated, copy and paste. Complex curve, of course, to solve most problematic things like sequence of curves. That's always the most problematic things when you do a complex typeface. So we did that. One version was to have, with a few smoothing, was to have historical rendering of the font. And I decided to push that project further. This is the historical rendering of this Jacques de Senlec. And based on the same curves, I wanted to have a font expressing a digital identity. So the curves are almost the same. It's just the serif and the stroke endings that are clearly like a digital DNA for the font. I made also a italic companion to that. Okay, developed the whole family. Then the font, was a good surprise, was bought by Apple last summer to be used in a near future, I don't know how, on possibly all their devices. And to be like, I was looking for a method and a logic to revisit historical fonts, and I'm quite comfortable with this final solution here. For me, it's really different from what I did previously. Well, it's a bit too... I was happy to see that in this year, the competition of the most beautiful Swiss books, there was 2 books received the prize from Young Studio, from Casper Folloyo here. They seems to be happy to use the font, and this could be a solution for a next project for me. Next project, like here it's a sketch. I'm not sure about that. It's like many type designer, I'm fascinated by William Addison Dwiggen's simple reduction, but without a caricature of a font. So the font is not finished. It will be used in a couple of days by a young studio. I wanted to see if it's possible to meet Dwiggins, to make a complex font, but without doing a caricature. I don't know if I won't go further. I wanted to have a companion of Chancery hand in the style of Jan van Krimpen. The name of the font right now is WoW, but I don't know what will happen with that style, which is a bit new for me. So, yeah, it's a bit like a walk through history and through. Also, would like to have mistake, like noisy detail in a corner, and so on. One of the last projects was a font for the Giacometti exhibition at the Guggenheim in New York that started last week, I think. Wanted to revisit what Herbert Matte did for the Guggenheim, to have this very complex 3D-like lettering, exploring different solutions to be used for the book, for the signage, and maybe later on we will think of developing a lowercase, what Herbert Matte didn't do, to have a companion to release the font. A quick view of my last commercial project, will be probably this fall, is Jean Jannon. Jean Jannon, it's an historical typeface, to put it, I have 5 minutes. It was the most influential serif typeface of the monotype for the 20th century. It has been revisited by historians, and there were always interest to connect the Jannon to Garamond. There was a local historian of north of France, Jean-Baptiste, I forgot his name, but he was a pioneer, Brincourt, sorry. The famous Beatrice Ward, she identified correctly what was named Garamond to Jean Jannon. And the last study, very deep, from Hugh Williamson. But I was mostly interested by type designer. Here the original drawing by Fred Gaudy for what was the Garamond monotype, which is true rendering of Jannon. And I think to make a good revival, we have to learn from previous revival. I always like a lot the Tonistan ITC Garamond, especially because it very correctly pushed the Jannon toward a more calligraphic solution, which is probably not correct, but I really like that. And to put it very short, I propose to connect the Jannon to Flemish design, map design, information design, and not to France, sorry, and not to Garamond, to Jodocus Ontius, so the hound, it's a signature, quality control, under the control of his dog. Ontius make devices like the tool of the, and the Jannon, to put it very short, has to be like coated in steel, to be dynamic, sharp, of course. And I wanted to simplify it. It's more obvious here, to have very simple vector, but I wanted to have a bit of noise to increase the dynamic, so the counters is tilted and nothing is really upright in it, and to find like a digital language to translate the Jannon. The full set of swashes, it's like a journey in a foreign country. So, yeah.
Only 14 years after its birth, the iconic Bauhaus School of Design was shut down by the Nazi regime. Many treasures and unfinished masterpieces were left behind, lost to the world. Founded on the central idea of training a new generation of artists to create a better world, Bauhaus laid the foundation for modern design as we know it and changed creativity forever. But in 1930s Germany, the progressive ideas of the Bauhaus were considered threatening, and the school's closure became inevitable. But sometimes, what's been lost to history can be brought back. The influence of Bauhaus lives on, and now you can design with a piece of living history.